从拉布拉，我们祭拜了埋葬在那边的中国墓园的30位华工以后，我又重新回到 Carlin 的墓院，不知道怎么，我还是想去再祭拜他们一下，讲讲我心中的话。我在心里对他们要讲的话太多太多，我说真的，1、2个月都没好好睡，就天天在祷告，天天在紧张。有时候在问我自己，我在这紧张什么？一切顺其自然就好了嘛。可是我就是紧张，所以经过了1个礼拜的时间，可是我还是觉得不可想象，还在怀疑，我真的办到了吗？终于9月6号来了好多来宾。自从1996年，当他们发现埋葬在 Carlin 的这个事情以后，我也是偶然的机会从客人口中得到这个消息。
In 1996, a local resident here in Carlin scraped the top off of a coffin, and he called the sheriff, and the sheriff came and exhumed the body. In the end, we ended up with 13 burials. It was a forgotten Chinese cemetery. Preservation was excellent. They were in redwood coffins.
Straight row, just right next to each other. I was driving down the interstate going to Elko one day, and there was all these people. I thought it was very cool. Randy and Cammie had found the first one, because they was leveling out to put their house. And it wasn't on my property to start off with. Then they started going onto my property too. They found the mummy just on the other side of the fence on my property. And they found the brick in the mummy.
我有位客人，他来吃 lunch 的时候，说我要不要去看一下，我就去看了。我心情就是很复杂。他们在启动那个棺木的时候，我觉得很对不起他们。我到了 supermarket 买了一件简单的东西，买了一些水果。幸好我这里有点香嘛，我回到那个地方，他们已经埋葬差不多100年了。我说我们需要跟他们做一个仪式，每一个人分了3支香，跟他们3鞠躬，表示很大的歉意。我顺便也告诉他们，我说我们会把你们安葬回去。可是我没有想到，等了20多年。我只知道他们是华工，他们是来到 Carlin 以后，帮助修建铁路，或是在那个金矿在做工，所以我就觉得这一批华工不简单，千辛万苦来到这个美国，都是想过一个好日子嘛，对不对？可是没想到，就是怎么说，客死异乡嘛。
We did an initial analysis of the remains. Eventually, they were sent to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. They were analyzed by the anthropology department down there. The bones showed that they had a rough life. Most of them had different injuries through their life. One of them, you know, the lower leg bones, the tibia and fibula, it had been broken and they had slipped past one another. They were never reset, they healed in place. So the guy would have had one leg that was 1 inch, 2 inches shorter than the other leg. He must have had a very bad limp the rest of his life, probably pain the rest of his life.
I really want to talk about our people and how you guys all come to celebrate the Carlin 13 people. These people were done wrong. They were brutally abused and worked so hard. And then they were buried in Carlin and they were forgotten. And they were taken away from us.
The archaeologists came over and they dug the bones, excavated them, and they came to the council and they talked about taking them to be studied for the state museum. They took them away in 1996. The city was told they would be back in 6 months. Apparently that didn't happen.
所以我就在等他们搬回来。我每年就问有关的朋友，问他们在哪里。他们刚开始告诉我是在 Reno， 后来就说是在 Carson City， 后来就不知道怎么又回到拉斯维加斯UNLV。后来等到2001年的时候，他们做了一个 document， 就是纪录片。我在想，他们做完了以后应该要埋葬，就是送回来嘛。可是他们没有。
Poor little Lee, it had just ate her up because when they left, she told them, you're going to go for a little while and then you come home. And that didn't happen, and that was just wrong, totally wrong.
Carlin was an important place on the railroad, and it never was a large town, but it was important because and so you had a lot of railroad workers here, including Chinese.
The railroad is our past. We were the division point, so families moved here with the railroad. They stayed with the railroad because it was a turnaround. It had a roundhouse, and the Chinese workers turned them by hand.
We know the identification of 2 of them. The others, we don't really have any idea. One of them, he was beaten to death. He had a broken jaw, broken ribs, broken pelvis. He had a terrible death. There was a newspaper account of a guy who, and they think that maybe he had dementia. And he was the only one not found in a redwood coffin. His was just a box, rough box. He was sort of sprawled out in it, what you might expect if it was a body that was really decomposed. People didn't really want to handle it. But most of them probably were laborers. Some of them still possessed the Chinese braid, the queue. A material put on it to extend his queue so it went down further. There was a smoking pipe, and there were some grave goods with them, offerings such as Chinese olives, some peanut shells. There were meat offerings.
Chinese people dug these 100 years ago with picks and shovels. And they're huge, and the work is perfect. And those tunnels are still used today. I think they did a really good job. I don't know if they should have been moved to start with, but nobody knew they was there. So that's not good either.
My family came to Carlin in the 1920s. I'm fourth generation railroad brat. My grandfather and my great-grandfather all worked for the railroad. My dad and my brother worked for the railroad as well. And the Chinese workers did all these rails.
What's that?
Another spike.
Oh, but it's a new one though.
Yeah. I met Lee Chin in the 80s. They came to Carlin and opened the restaurant. And we got to be friends over the years. She came to me and talked about the Chinese that were taken away. I wasn't living at Carlin that time. That was in 1996. They found a forgotten cemetery up here. And Lee came to me and she said, Margaret, is there anything you can do to help me get them back? And I said, I don't know, I can see what I can do. I called UNLV and they said, yes, they're here, but we need to have an MOU with the city of Carlin to take them and we need the permitting done. Well, yeah, that's normal, but there's identification with the normal moving of human remains. Somebody knows who that is. These, they did not have identification. They had 3 identifications for sure. So the permitting's like, okay, this is something we've never done this way. And it took several months of back and forth and back and forth. And this needs done and that needs done to get the paperwork. But they were basically sitting on a shelf down at UNLV. We focus on what we're doing. And to some people, those were just bones. But they weren't just bones, they're people. The right things bring them home.
Transporting bodies, which is not an easy thing to do. In fact, the state of Nevada apparently hasn't run into the issue before. My wife Donna and I went down to Las Vegas and we rented a U-Haul trailer because 13 bodies plus the artifacts boxes was quite a load.
Tim went on his own dime down and got them because he felt so bad, and he brought them home.
Loaded them in the back of the U-Haul trailer and drove back to Elko. We didn't get stopped by Highway Patrol, which I was worried about.
Tim called me 4 days before we were supposed to intern. He said, Margaret, you know they're not in coffins. I said, what? He says, they're in like plastic cardboard boxes. I'm like, oh no, we can't do that. So I'm like, oh wow, how are we gonna do this? I got 4 days. I started calling, I called Gary Wright, called Les Tracy, he's another good old boy. I said, guys, can you give me a hand here? I need to build 13 coffins before we reinterring these guys. So then I went to Home Depot and I'm like, okay, I've got $500 cash on me. Let's go see what we could do. So I asked the manager, can you help me? Yeah, I can help you. He said, give you everything you need. I said, what? Home Depot donated to us high quality plywood for free. All the nails, all the screws. And so we brought all the materials home. Janice Holmes put $150 for the paint and whatever else materials we needed. We were working 4 days, sun up to sundown, getting this done. You still find the goodness in people. That's the good thing about small town America. Donetta Skinner, she's one of the old mayors in Carlin. She says, I know where there's a hand cart. Well, that'll be cool. Where's it at? She's like, oh, it's down Pine Valley. Okay, we go get a trailer, hook it up, and her and I drive down Pine Valley.
是很小很小很小的镇，什么都没有的。但我一到了那个坟场一看，那桌子摆的好好的。
Usually when you go to a funeral, you come away sad. I wanted to jump for joy. They were home.
There was a time
They come home, finally.
in your life when you had no expectations. You saw the day before the sunset.
Welcome back, citizens of Carlin. I am Mayor Holbrook, and I am honored and thankful you have returned. You've been gone too long. Your broken bones tell a story of a time we should not forget. And your being here today has made us remember the past. Lee Chin, will you help these men find the peace and rest they deserve?
1996, and I find these people buried in Carlin. Have to taken off, moved to UNR, Carson City, UNLV. I know one day have to bring back, but I wait a long time.
去年12月的时候嘛，还是11月的时候 ，Elbow Museum 一位先生打电话联络我，他说他会帮我把所有的那个华工的衣服送回来，的条件是要把一些衣物要放在 museum 展览。我说没有关系，只要他们回来安葬就可以了。所以我在等这位先生的消息，也是等了几个月没有消息了。
When you knocked the lamp that shattered, but it didn't really matter. It was replaced before your eyes. But time, it will leave you behind. In time, yes, time, it will leave you behind. In time.
跟做梦的一样，我没有想到能办成。
先祖们，你们好好安息吧。
But time,
That's a human being.
it
He
will
needs to respect. Didn't need to be brought back home.
in time. Yes, time, it will leave you behind.
Carlin's first residents. And like I said, they built this town. They're the ones that cleared the land. They're the ones that hauled in the building materials, and they did most of the work.
Carlin's 150th birthday this year, and as part of our celebration, we nominate people who have made Carlin strong over the last 150 years. 13 of you to our list. But not only did you make Carlin strong in life, you have made us strong in your passing. And though we have forgotten what you each did individually, this community and the railroad that ran through it testify that you were here. Thank you for allowing us to disturb your rest. And now your work here is done, and it's time to let you rest in peace.
It's very nice to get them reburied with honors, and now they'll have a resting place. Hopefully we'll get a monument eventually here.
We know pretty well that between 11 and 13,000 Chinese were employed by the Central Pacific at its peak. Now, how many were still employed by the time we got to Promontory Summit in May of 1869? We're not sure. The Central Pacific Railroad estimates about 5,000 to 6,000 people were still employed at that point, Chinese workers. A lot of people were, oh yay, May 10th we're done. Like, no, this is a living, breathing railroad, which means every single day you need to be out there maintaining it. And that's where the Chinese, I felt, for 40 years potentially, were the mainstay. They were the ones that were out there every single day, 6 days a week, maintaining that railroad in the most barren, isolated terrain you have in the American West. The number of Chinese workers who died on the railroad is really truly unknown to this day because the railroads didn't keep really great records of death. I just feel personally bad it took 21 years to get them back home, or at least back to their burial place. But that's not an uncommon story, that these are people. There's a view of them as objects of study.
我们这边有一个 fishing pond， 后来他们就做了一个 Chinese garden， 他们曾经在那里面种了很多菜。
They gardened and grew vegetables to feed the railroad workers. That's how they came in here to be in that time.
I've tried to grow a garden here. It's very hard. But they say the Chinese grew massive crops and fed everybody. And I wish I knew how they did it.
We cannot change what was done in the past. We can change what we do in the future. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Chin will be leading our opening dedication ceremony, and Margaret Yee, would you guys please come up?
I am so grateful and the Carlin city, and welcome the oldest city come back to their home. Thank you for all your great help for our ancestors. Thank you very much.
Everybody who's here has a hand in today's celebration. When Carlin was founded in 1867, there were already Chinese here. They were already living here. And by the 1870 census, there were 41 listed in the census, including 4 women. The oldest was a 52-year-old cook, and the youngest was a 14-year-old boy. By 1880, the numbers had grown to about 60 in Carlin, almost 200 in Elko County. In 1882, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. In 1890, there were no Chinese in Carlin. There were no Chinese in Elko County. That's the effect that laws have on our population. We should always remember that our country is built by people from somewhere else.
We're 150 years old this year, our town. The railroad brought us here. They were good to us for a long time, and they've left us. Born and raised here, and I love it, and I hate to see it fall apart. So we're gonna fix that. We're going to the future.
这里时候，说真的，并不喜欢这个城市，因为太小了。那时候英文也不好，后来我就开始慢慢的融入他们的社群。到2年的时间，那个木头已经开始有毁损的迹象，所以我们就计划要弄一个好一点的石头，希望可以永久的保存下来。我的客人 Brian Jackson 他 offer 他说我可以帮你。我没有想到他真的开车跑到爱达荷去找这个石头，去了好几家，找到一个很大的石头，差不多有2吨那么重。About 5 foot tall, 5 foot wide。7月的时候，到了场馆，告诉我，他说 Lee, look outside。我心里在想，外面有什么可看的？我转头一看，他那个大卡车后面拖了一个大石头回来，那个铜板已经都镶在那个石头上面。哇，我高兴得跳起来。先祖们，你们辛苦了，你们所有的付出已经得到回报。希望以后的岁月有更多的人知道你们所付出的辛劳。我住在韩国25年，然后我来到美国。来到美国第1年，我就住在 Elko， 然后我先生看中一个餐馆，就是现在我开的这个餐馆。所以我在这个乡下，有3个孩子，把他们养大，他们现在都有自己的工作。这也是 Carlin 在背后 support 我才有的结果。2002年，我餐馆起火了。那天非常的冷，好多消防人员，他们不停地煮咖啡，叫我放心，他们一定要抢救所有的东西。最叫我感动的就是 Fire Chief Will Johnston 把我先生放在场馆的那个关公烧得黑黑的，他捧出来交给我。所以他们对我的恩情啊，是不能用言语可以形容的。我爸爸是18岁的时候去到韩国，我妈妈是6岁去到韩国，跟着我外祖父，所以我是第2代华侨。我父母的最大的心愿是有一天，100年以后，希望能回到家乡，可是他们没有那个机会，因为那个是韩国的政策。还没有开放跟中国。我父亲他真的很想家的，他常常跟我讲一些老家的故事给我听。我外婆也讲山东永清县故乡的事，那种思乡的心情啊，真的没有人会明白的。所以我加州也有家，可是呢，对我来说是个暂时的家。可是Carlin这个家，是我永远的家。